These are the creepiest SpongeBob episodes ever, and the third one is gone. The episode begins with SpongeBob waking up and realizing that Gary is nowhere to be found, so he comes up with an explanation for his disappearance. He does the same for both Squidward and Patrick, while adding that,
"Not everyone is blessed with my natural good looks."
yeah, we'll see about that. Then he goes to work, makes a bunch of Krabby Patties that no one ordered, and returns home to the realization that Gary's missing. Quickly, he runs to Squidward's house, examines his clarinet for temperature by licking it, then swallowing the whole thing. Gross. But the result's the same. Squid's missing too. Dread starts crawling up on him little by little with every empty house he visits, till finally it hits him that everyone's gone. SpongeBob, the nicest person in Bikini Bottom, is all alone, with no friends under the Pacific Ocean. But even then, SpongeBob decides to keep the memory of Bikini Bottom alive by living out everyone's lives for them. So he goes and nails every character's character, from Squidward to Mr. Krabs to Patrick and even Sandy. However, while playing Mrs. Puff, the sudden wave of grief hits him and he bursts into tears. Now, this is a great piece of writing because that's exactly how grief works. So, SpongeBob realizes that he can't live everyone's lives, but that only leads him to an even more depressing conclusion. Immediately, he sees a bunch of blank driver licenses and seizes his only chance to get a driver's license. So he snaps a passport and attaches it to the license, then proceeds to pick a ride. Unfortunately, he ends up picking the one that hates him and names it Bodie. Who would have thought the boats had lives? Maybe that's why SpongeBob never passes his boat exams. The boats hate him. Anyways, SpongeBob joyrides throughout the city until finally crashing into his bedroom and sleeping off. The next day, he wakes up from a nightmare about the nightmare that is now his life, only to find Bodie snoring on his bed. That's pretty rude though. So he takes Bodie to the Krusty Krab, prepares a Krabby Patty, and serves it to Bodie. But of course, he doesn't like it. He's a boat for Neptune's sake. After this, he returns home and we discover that Bodie knows about Patty Patrick. See, Patty Patrick is a statue of Patrick made out of 100% Krabby Patty meat in SpongeBob's house. So SpongeBob goes to chat with Patty Patrick, who tells him that Bodie doesn't like him and is listening to every word they say. But when SpongeBob leaves the chat, he finds himself in what I can only explain as a standoff with Bodie. Trouble's brewing, and 3 days later, he now fully understands. SpongeBob is not just alone, he's now being hunted by Bodie and his gang of Bikini Bottom boats. So he runs to the cinema, realizes he's not safe there, and runs out to the streets, stopping only to grab an axe. So SpongeBob is on the streets, losing his mind, as a bus approaches and stops in front of him. Then he strikes it with the axe and voila, every Bikini Bottomite steps out. Turns out there was a National No SpongeBob Day. So the terrible citizens of Bikini Bottom not only neglected SpongeBob, but they made a giant wooden effigy of him, burnt it, and danced on its ashes. Worst still, Patrick, who's supposed to be his best friend, doesn't even seem to care. It's like everyone stabbed him in the back, but they sent his best friend to go twist in the knife. This is really a heartbreaking scene, and SpongeBob is crying. But Mr. Krabs managed to put a positive spin on it all, and of course, SpongeBob believes it, which is good because it prompts dumb Patrick to ask for his own No Patrick Day, and he gets it. This is one episode that gives you chills like no other. In fact, it made one Redditor post, "I wonder who hates SpongeBob more, Squidward or the show's writers." The intro starts with SpongeBob getting forced out of sleep and into the day by his alarm clock. Then it brings alive on TV one of our deepest fears, the fear of being alone. Then we get to see SpongeBob deal with grief like we all do and overcome it. The whole atmosphere of the episode is so suspenseful and thrilling while keeping that fun and comical aspect of the show that we all enjoy. You get to see the entire Bikini Bottom population play a cruel joke on SpongeBob because of a probably made-up holiday, then Patrick getting what he literally asked for, thus bringing it all together. We see SpongeBob maintain his optimism even in the face of tragedy, for a while before insanity starts to creep in, then returning to his fun self. From the quiet atmosphere to the creepiness of seeing SpongeBob being hunted by boats, it all just keeps you gripped on the edge of your seat, laughing and getting inspired. And that crazy plot twist that there was a national No SpongeBob Day that SpongeBob never knew about in all his 20+ years in Bikini Bottom, that's just crazy. The second creepiest episode is Squidward in Clarinet Land, and it starts off with the unusual event of a happy Squidward going to work at the Krusty Krab. This unusual happiness stems from his upcoming clarinet recital, but then it seems Bikini Bottom has conspired to make him unhappy. So, from getting door slammed to being punched by the morning breath of a fish, Squid remained unmoved. His clarinet was safe and nothing could touch it, not even a drop. Poor Squidward explodes and decides to take the law into his hands. No, I mean literally, he took the labor laws and approached his greedy boss like most of us wished we would, demanding for a place to keep his stuff. And yeah, I looked it up, we don't have such laws here. Sorry. So Mr. Krabs reluctantly agrees, disappears, and reappears with something that looks like a death trap until SpongeBob cleans it, and finally Squidward has a place to keep his clarinet. His happiness returns, but doesn't last. Later, SpongeBob goes somewhere that I assume is his home and returns with loads of tools to reconstruct the locker. So he completely transforms the locker and moves Squidward's clarinet to this drawer. So, Squidward returns to his desk, satisfied again, but he's soon forced to return when SpongeBob continues with the locker renovations. Now, his clarinet has been relocated to... Then, the next time he sees his clarinet, it's with SpongeBob, who's running away with it. He gives chase right into a weird section with a small hole that leads to a stage. He sees a curtain there, pulls it, and finds himself in a strange world that I guess is Clarinet Land. Filled with wonder, he steps inside, sees his clarinet standing on the floor before it magically disappears into SpongeBob's hands. Then he chases SpongeBob again until suddenly a giant eagle appears, knocking Squidward to the ground. The eagle introduces himself as... Oh, sorry, the place is Hornet's Forest, not Clarinet Land. So Squidward informs the eagle that he's looking for his clarinet, which sounded ignorant to the eagle because apparently you can't own a clarinet. How weird is that? Well, it's not as weird as an eagle swallowing Squidward just to teach him some respect. Gross. Now, Squidward sliding down into what I guess is the eagle's belly. Then he sees SpongeBob running toward the intestine, I guess. Look, I don't know much about eagle anatomy, but Squidward climbs over some kind of hill and jumps at SpongeBob. They both fall, but only Squidward lands in a strange mirror room. This room has a chair and 2 mirrors on both sides, where 2 other squids swallow their clarinet and start playing right into original Squidward's ear. Then we see Squid on the run. Oh no, he's chasing SpongeBob while they're both running on a clarinet. Then they both fall into the clarinet. Next thing we know, Squid's blown out of the clarinet into something like a SpongeBob-themed pinball machine. Turns out that it's a giant Patrick playing the game and winning, but instead of getting a coin, his reward is Squidward. Finally, Squidward gets the chance to ask the question on everyone's mind. Giant Patrick answers him with, "It must be all the pressure, huh?" Hold up, I think that explains this entire episode, but I'll get into that later. For now, Giant Patrick runs away because of some noise, and seconds later, Squidward gets swallowed by a vacuum cleaner that eventually explodes and shoots both SpongeBob and Squidward into space. Now, it's a space chase, and Squidward catches SpongeBob only for him to appear back in Mr. Krabs' locker alone, tired, mystified, and even liquefied. Okay, I think the madness is over now. Just then, Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob walk into the room, and right after Mr. Krabs narrates his fraudulent activities, SpongeBob walks over to Squidward and asks if he's okay. Turns out, SpongeBob had the clarinet on him the entire time, which just drives Squidward insane. So he snatches his clarinet, throws SpongeBob in the locker, chains it up, and throws the whole thing into a bus headed for far, far away. Satisfied, Squidward ends his workday and goes to the clarinet recital. Now he's ready to perform, but as he opens his clarinet box, he finds SpongeBob in there again. This time, he just runs away. Whew, such a tragic tale, and who would have thought that SpongeBob could be such a menace? But what's really going on here, and why does it all seem like a fever dream? Well, I think it's because it is. I think Squidward feared he would perform poorly at the recital because SpongeBob didn't let him prepare well, and so he hid this fear under the mask of happiness. I'm sure most of us can relate to this, and if you can't, you should hear that Eminem song titled Lose Yourself.
His palms are sweaty, knees weak, arms are heavy.
And that's what Squidward did. He lost himself the first time he went to the locker and did not find his clarinet. But he did not actually chase SpongeBob. He simply crept out and lay on the floor helpless and stuck in the fever dream. That's this episode. Basically, I think this episode makes it clear that as long as SpongeBob lives, Squidward will probably never succeed with his clarinet, and that's just tragic. And finally, the creepiest SpongeBob episode of all time is aptly named I Had an Accident, and it starts off with Patrick having an accident and dying. Okay, that only happened in a game he was playing while actually sandboarding with SpongeBob and Sandy. But he still suffers a brutal accident, he just doesn't die. So Sandy came up with this great idea. At first, SpongeBob agrees to listen to the mountain, but he soon gets caught up showboating. I mean, this is a guy that can't even pass his boating lessons, and he's showing off. Anyways, he suffered his own accident, shattering his butt, and it would take 20 hours plus lots of stapling and some glue to reassemble SpongeBob's butt. And don't forget that SpongeBob's
You're a lucky, 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 lucky luck boy.
But even with all that luck, the doctor warns him that his next fall might be his last, and from then on, he would be using an iron butt. So a scared SpongeBob goes on a round-the-clock butt patrol as the whole Bikini Bottom conspires to destroy his butt. First, we see a fish who SpongeBob mistakes for Diddy, then he had to reject taking part in a 7-mile spanking machine. And what's Squidward doing participating in such a game anyway? Well, SpongeBob has had enough. I mean, he's not even in Hollywood, and yet his butt is not safe anymore. So he decides to embark on a permanent personal lockdown, one that Sandy and Patrick tried to prevent. But SpongeBob has made up his mind that...
Listen, I told you that I'm never leaving my house again.
Never ever?
Never, ever, ever.
Never, never, ever, ever for never ever?
Never, ever, never, never, ever, ever, never.
After an iconic back and forth, and SpongeBob being smart enough to find a way to continue working as a fry cook, but not enough to figure out how to get the food he normally eats, he asks his new friend Chip to show them to the door. So once again, SpongeBob relegates himself to playing with inanimate objects, but Sandy is determined to find a way to get her friend out of the house. The first trick was jellyfishing, which not only failed, but SpongeBob already improvised with dust collecting. Next, they got him a cake and asked that he come out to blow out a candle underwater. Don't overthink it, it's just cartoon logic. After another failed plan, Sandy decides to throw everything she's got into getting SpongeBob outside the house, but everything fails. Finally, they decide to exploit his savior complex, with Sandy telling Patrick to wear a gorilla suit and pretend to attack her so that SpongeBob will have to come out and save her. Unfortunately, Patrick puts on the same gorilla suit he wore for Halloween, which exposes their plan. But then the show's writers had their own plans too by introducing another Patrick. See, it turns out that while Patrick wore his gorilla suit, another Patrick that wasn't even Patrick at all was putting on a Patrick suit. What the heck? It's a live-action gorilla? Just so you know, we made a pretty dope video that explains what was really happening in this episode, so you should watch that after this. Anyways, both Sandy and Patrick were in real trouble, forcing SpongeBob to consult his inanimate friends, and thanks to Chip, our boy takes a leap of faith and steps out of the house. Great, but next thing we know, he gets attacked by a piece of paper. Then something really weird happens. Why does it seem like Squidward isn't aware of what's going on? Anyway, SpongeBob starts celebrating the end of his personal lockdown, but it's a bit too early as the gorilla grabs him and literally tore him in two. Wait, is this still even a kids show? Well, that question is secondary to this one. At this, everything begins to unravel as this creepy gorilla calls out for a George, who's a horse, or is that a zebra? Anyway, George shows up and they ride away into the sunset. The end? Oh no, there's this live-action family that's as confused as we are about everything that has happened, so they turn off the TV. Now, it's the end. For real. There are so many theories trying to explain what was really happening in that episode, but here's the fact. We've just witnessed SpongeBob overcome his fear of being outside, a fear that's very much part of the human experience. So yeah, even an episode as creepy as this can't take that away from me.